All right, Islam. Finally covering that religion on my YouTube channel here. Okay, Islam comes from the teachings of Muhammad. All right, and when we say Muhammad, that's not exactly his teachings, right? Muslims would say these are actually the teachings of Allah. They are the direct word of Allah given to Muhammad, and then Muhammad just repeated these words, all right? And hence the Qur'an, the holy book of Muslims, is called the Qur'an, which means recitation, all right? So recitation here. So all Muhammad did was recite what was told him by an angel from Allah to say, all right? It said, speak these words. He spoke. So Muhammad didn't actually write the Quran. I think that's something that a lot of people who are not Muslims are unaware of. Muhammad is simply a prophet, according to Muslims, who received this revelation directly through an angel of Allah. And so the Quran is simply a recitation, right, of these words that was given him. All right, now along with the Quran, however, we also have the Hadiths. Hadiths means recollections or narratives. And so the Hadiths are very big, very massive, very voluminous. They are essentially kind of like the Talmud of Judaism, right? They are sayings of the Prophet, essentially. And these were written sometimes centuries removed from Muhammad, and they are basically a record of things Muhammad said and did in his life. All right, so the Quran doesn't have the words of Muhammad at all. That's strictly the words of Allah, according to Muslims. So you then move into the Hadiths, you get the life and narrative and sayings of Muhammad himself recorded, which are also very valid and important. I guess we would say second importance to Muslims as they live out their faith, to know how to live, because they show how Muhammad took the Quran and lived that out in his life. And so put the two together, this is where a lot then of the teachings within Islam are derived. Pretty basic. So some facts on Muhammad. Muhammad was born in Mecca, happens to be in modern day Saudi Arabia, and at the time Mecca was already a city of religious practice and pilgrimage, largely because Mecca has the black stone. It's a meteorite that fell from heaven. And this meteorite is enshrined in this black cubist shape called the Kaaba. I've actually seen it spelled a couple ways, K-A-B-A-H, but I believe Muslims actually use K-A-A-K-A-A? No, K-A-B-B-A, Kaaba. I'm pretty sure. Look it up. But there's different spellings. It's something I found with Islamic words. There are multiple spellings. Quran is sometimes spelled with a Q, sometimes a K. Sometimes it's Q-U-R with a hyphen, and then A-N. Sometimes it's K-O-R-A-N. So there are different spellings. I have seen Kaaba spelled quite differently. The religious textbook that I'm using for my world religions class that I teach chooses the K-A-B-H spelling, which is why I went with it. So anyways, just so you know, be aware of that, different spellings. But you see images here of that black stone embedded in here, and you see how it's concaved in. It's concaved in around this container inwardly, because people have rubbed it and rubbed it and rubbed it, and now it's eroded. So instead of it coming out of that little silver what was that? Some sort of silver container that juts out of this black shrine named the Kaaba, right? That contains this meteorite. People have rubbed it, and now it's concaved inward with it. But Muslims would say that this meteorite came directly from Allah, and that Abraham actually was the one that built the Kaaba. I don't know how we would prove that in history, though. Muhammad, okay, grew up in Mecca. His profession then was a caravan driver. As a caravan driver, he would have exchanged goods and met with a lot of different cultures and people, and through this he would have been well aware of the teachings of Judaism and Christianity, as well as other religions. And so what I personally speculate, because I'm a Christian here, is that Muhammad essentially took kind of like a smorgasbord of what was already happening in Mecca with the Kaaba, as well as with Judaism and Christianity, and sort of put them in a blender type thing and mixed them up, and out pops this new conglomeration, which is called Islam. But that's my thought behind it. Muslims would definitely not say that. At age 40 on Mount Hira, Muhammad received his first revelation. All right, and so at first, this is according to Michael Malloy's book, which is called Experiencing the World's Religions, 5th edition here. So Michael Malloy, he records, and I haven't researched this one. This is one I want to look into more, if Muslims will actually admit to this or not. But definitely Michael Malloy shares this, that Muhammad at first, when he got this first revelation, thought, maybe I'm going nuts. Am I losing my mind? He also thought maybe I'm hallucinating. And the one that really stood out to me was, this is a demonic apparition. Which personally is where I stand on the situation. If this is a real thing that he experienced, I would lean towards demonic. It makes sense to me. I even kind of lean that way with Joseph Smith. Two completely different people, different times, different periods, different cultures, different ethnicities, and the way they received the revelation and the way it was given, and the focus and drive of both of these seems very similar in its origin as well as its spread. And you can look some stuff up on that, and you will find that a lot of people have drawn that parallel, and that whole books have been written on it. And also, if you're really interested, you can look up Lutheran Satire site and find their video on YouTube of this comparison. Anyways, that was Muhammad's first impression, all right? And over time, he became convinced that it was the angel Gabriel, and he had repeated visions, and he shared them with his wife and close friends and family, and they believed them. And then they were the first Muslims. And Muslim means people who submit. And in this case, they're submitting to God, which Muslims call Allah. And Allah is just the Arabic name for God. His revelations insisted on a few main teachings here. And the first one is that there's one God, and that God is Allah. And that God demanded the destruction of statues and images. And that Allah denounced lending money at exorbitant rates. And so, this obviously brings Muhammad into some conflict with what's going on here. Because, like I said, Mecca was already a site of religious pilgrimage during Muhammad's day. And so, by this announcement that there's only one God, Allah, it denounced the tribal gods, right, whose images were in the Kaaba, which meant basically everything that was going on there religiously was wrong. And so this also then ticked off the businessmen in the area, because just as Paul's preaching in the book of Acts, we see ticked off businessmen because they were making money off selling these idols, right? And so if you've ever been near like a Buddhist temple, for instance, in China, it's big business around there. And so if you go in and say Buddhism's all wrong, all the business people around the temple would be pretty upset. And so same thing happened with Muhammad. So he did not make a lot of friends here, all right? And so he ended up having to flee to a nearby city named Medina. And it was there in Medina that he gathered together more troops. And there's a lot more history here that I'm going to skip over. But under all this persecution, what ultimately ended up happening, he ended up having a night ascent, or a night journey, in which Muhammad's lifted up across some sort of fancy steed. You see him riding on it in this picture here, carried from Medina all the way over to Jerusalem. And on the way, he meets all the prophets of Allah that had gone before: Adam, Moses, David, even Jesus. Muslims do say Jesus is a prophet of Allah. So he meets all these prophets, and this gives him this great assurance and confirmation that despite the persecution, he is a prophet. All right? And so eventually he comes back into Mecca and cleans house, which is something I'll probably make a future video on some of that whole process. All right? Just know he did make it back. He did get the Kaaba cleansed of all the idols, and he gets Islam established, right? And Muslims would say it was through the power of Allah that all this happened. Okay, so here's a interesting thing. This is near my hometown. This is in Nashville, Tennessee. It's a replica of the original Parthenon. They picked it in Nashville because, well, Nashville's called the Athens of the South, right? And the Parthenon was in Athens. And so this always stood out to me. I took a lot of field trips here through like elementary school days. I think I even took one in middle school. Just these massive pillars that hold up this huge stone roof, right? And so pillars, of course, support what's above. They hold things up. And so the main thrust of Muhammad's teachings, the things that Muslims must essentially do, are the 5 pillars of the Islamic faith. All right. And so the idea is these 5 tenets or practices that Allah requires of His people, those that submit to Him, are essentially holding up the Islamic faith. All right. And so here are the 5 pillars. Yeah, that was a mistake. So here are the 5 pillars of the Islamic faith, all right? And here they are with their Arabic names, the Shahada, Salah, Zakah, Swam, and Hajj. And so for an English name on this, you got the creed, you have prayer, you have charity, you have fasting during Ramadan, and you have a pilgrimage, aka the Hajj. These 5 together are the pillars of Islam, and there's a lot I could share on each of these. I'm going to just probably hit the first one in this video and then leave it to you to do a little bit of research. You can dig through the Qur'an to find this, or you can look online and you can find it anywhere. Quick summary though. Shahada is a testimony and declaration of faith. Salah, they pray 5 times a day. They face towards Mecca. Zakat, 2.5% charity to the poor required each year. The Swam, fasting in the month of Ramadan, which is, I think it's the 8th month of the lunar calendar for Islam. And then the Hajj, it's a pilgrimage to Mecca, and you need to do it at least once in your lifetime. So focusing on the creed here. Here's what the creed is. It's the central tenet or teaching. If you're going to boil everything down to one main teaching, this is it. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is His messenger. This single sentence, recited in belief, is what makes a person a Muslim. And believe it or not, it's also the first words whispered into the ear of an infant. All right? Wow. All right? And so based off of this creed, Muslims, would look at Christians and say, you don't believe in one God, you believe in 3 gods. All right? When it comes to Jesus, they deny that Jesus was God. And, however, they say He was a prophet. All right, so that's a little different. And they do not say Muhammad was divine. All right, so Allah is the only God. Muhammad is just His prophet as well as Jesus. I'll make some future videos getting into more along the lines of Jesus within the Quran and what Muslims actually say about Jesus, and how we can then link that to sharing the gospel of Jesus Christ. Good stuff, and I hope you can look into these pillars more and find out more information about each of them, and how how Muslims who are submitting to Allah will have these as a central part of their faith. In fact, the support of their faith. And just one more thought on that. You see that picture there, Islam's being held up by these pillars. I find it very awesome and radical that within Christianity we don't have pillars, we have a foundation to stand upon, and that Jesus Christ is our foundation, which to me is just amazing, right? It's a completely different way of looking at it. Here the pillars are things we do that support our faith. For Christians instead, we stand, right, on our solid foundation. Our faith is in our foundation, not our work holding up the roof. Big difference there, and I think that is where I'm going to finish this one, which is an introduction to Islam, when I just inserted a little comparison of Christianity. Hope you enjoyed this video and learned a good bit from it. God bless you all.